The Signal That Waited, a faith and science fiction audiobook. Episode 2. The Signal That Would Not Fade. The signal returned exactly 72 hours after the first transmission. Yaw Ati was alone when it happened. The station was quiet in the way only deep space installations could be. No footsteps, no distant chatter, only the soft hum of life support systems cycling faithfully in the background. Outside the observation window, Earth was no longer visible. They had crossed the threshold where home became an idea rather than a sight. Yaw stared at the waveform on his console, watching it scroll across the screen with an almost deliberate patience. The signal had no source. That fact alone violated protocol. Every transmission in known space had an origin, a satellite, a relay, a ship, a star system. This one did not. It arrived fully formed, as if space itself had decided to speak, and it had not stopped. Yaw adjusted his headset, replaying the audio channel again, not because he expected it to change, but because he needed to be certain that his memory was not filling in gaps that were never there. The tone was steady, not mechanical, not organic, something between intention and restraint. It did not repeat. It endured. He logged the anomaly for the third time, each report growing more precise, more careful. Words mattered now. Too much certainty would trigger escalation. Too much doubt would bury the signal in bureaucracy. When the command response finally came, it was shorter than he expected. Maintain observation. Do not attempt interpretation. Yaw leaned back in his chair. That instruction was familiar. It was the kind of sentence authority used when it wanted compliance without responsibility. Observe, record, do nothing else. But the signal was not passive. It did not behave like radiation or noise. It responded to nothing. Yet it felt aware of being heard. Yaw hesitated before speaking aloud, even though no one else was in the room. "Who's there?" he said quietly. The signal did not change. Still, something about the moment felt altered, as if the question itself had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. He closed his eyes. Yaw had been trained to trust instruments over instincts, data over intuition. Faith in his profession was considered a liability, useful only in ceremonies, never in analysis. And yet, as the minutes passed, he felt a growing certainty that the signal was not meant to be decoded. It was meant to be acknowledged. Another message arrived from command. This one marked priority. You are reminded that no unsanctioned engagement is permitted. Yaw smiled faintly. They were afraid. Not of the signal itself, but of what it represented. A voice beyond jurisdiction, a presence beyond command structure. He reached into his jacket and removed the small, worn object he kept there against regulation. A folded fragment of paper, creased from years of handling. A verse. He did not read it aloud. He did not need to. The words had followed him farther than Earth ever could. Yaw returned his attention to the console and began recording a private log, one not routed through official channels. If this is a test, then silence might be the wrong answer. The signal continued unwavering, not louder, not clearer, just present. And for the first time since leaving Earth, Yaw Ati felt certain of something he could not prove. The universe was not empty, and whatever was listening was waiting. Episode 3. Distance and authority. Distance changed how authority felt. On Earth, command was reinforced by proximity, offices, uniforms, voices that carried weight because they filled a room. In deep space, authority arrived as text on a screen, stripped of presence, asking to be obeyed on faith alone. Yaw read the message twice. All anomalous data is to be routed through central oversight. Further independent logging is prohibited. There was no explanation. There never was. Yaw did not respond immediately. He turned instead to the observation window, where the stars burned with a patience that felt older than policy. The signal continued in his headset, steady and untroubled by the latest directive. Authority, he thought, always announced itself. Whatever this was, did not. Yaw pulled up the signal's mathematical profile again. The structure was unmistakable now, layers of order nested within one another, ratios that echoed physical constants, harmonics that aligned too precisely to be accidental. This was not randomness pretending to be meaning. It was meaning expressed without words. Yaw remembered something his father once said, long before space had become his vocation. Creation does not argue for itself, the man had said. It simply exists. And existence, when examined honestly, tells the truth. Yaw had dismissed that as sentiment at the time. Now, surrounded by equations that refused to collapse into chaos, the memory returned with unexpected clarity. The signal did not command him. It did not threaten. It did not persuade. It simply was. And somehow that felt more authoritative than anything command had transmitted since launch. A new message arrived, flagged immediate compliance. Yaw felt the tension settle into his chest, not fear, but responsibility. Faith, he was beginning to realize, was not comfort, it was burden. To witness something and refuse to acknowledge it was not neutrality, it was abdication. He opened his private log again, aware that every entry deepened the distance between himself and the people who technically outranked him. If the universe is ordered, he said quietly, then silence is not emptiness, it is restraint. He paused. And restraint implies intention. The signal pulsed, no change in frequency, no measurable response, yet the timing felt deliberate, as though his words had landed somewhere beyond instrumentation. Yaw exhaled slowly. Command believed authority flowed downward, from institutions, from procedures, from hierarchy enforced by distance. But the signal suggested something older, authority that did not need enforcement, order that did not require permission to exist. Yaw closed the channel to central oversight, not permanently, just long enough to listen. And in that choice, small, unremarkable, and utterly irreversible, his faith crossed a threshold. It was no longer inherited, it was observed. Episode 4. The Threshold of Knowing. There was a difference between discovery and responsibility. Yaw Ati understood that now. Discovery could be cataloged, archived, deferred. Responsibility could not. Once something was known, truly known, it began to exert pressure, shaping choices whether permission was given or not. The signal had done that. Yaw noticed the change not in the data, but in himself. He found it harder to follow routine, harder to treat procedures as sufficient explanations. Every system check felt like an imitation of certainty rather than the real thing. He replayed the signal again, isolating its structure against the cosmic background. The mathematics held, always did, elegant, economical, nothing wasted. Yaw felt a quiet unease. In theology, simplicity was often considered a mark of truth. Not because truth was easy, but because it did not require excess to justify itself. The signal mirrored that principle too closely to ignore. Yaw received another transmission from command, this one longer, more carefully worded. You are reminded that meaning is assigned, not assumed. Maintain professional distance. Yaw read the sentence twice. Meaning is assigned. The phrase unsettled him. It implied that reality was neutral until sanctioned, that truth waited for authority to approve its existence. It was a useful belief for institutions, a dangerous one for anyone tasked with observation. Yaw leaned forward, elbows resting on the console. If meaning is assigned, then witness is irrelevant. If witness is irrelevant, then conscience is inefficient. If conscience is inefficient, then obedience becomes the highest virtue. Yaw thought again of the signal. It had not asked to be understood. It had not demanded belief. It simply existed, structured and patient, as though daring anyone to deny its coherence. Yaw opened the old verse again, not physically this time, but in memory. Faith, he was learning, was not blind assent. It was alignment. To see order and call it chaos was not skepticism. It was refusal. The system lights dimmed momentarily as the station adjusted power allocation. For an instant, the stars beyond the window seemed brighter, sharper, unfiltered by artificial balance. Yaw felt the weight of the threshold he was approaching. To know something was to become accountable to it. Command could order silence, policy could demand restraint, but neither could unknow what had already been revealed. Yaw activated a secondary recorder, one designed for long-term storage, data meant to survive power loss, evacuation, even abandonment. If truth has structure, he said calmly, then evidence deserves witness. The signal continued. Unmoved, unthreatened, unafraid of scrutiny. Yaw closed his eyes briefly. Crossing a threshold did not require announcement. It only required movement. And Yaw had already stepped forward.
Episode 5. Faith Under Command. Command did not accuse Yaw Ati. That was what unsettled him most. Accusations could be answered, charges could be defended against. What arrived instead was concern, carefully worded, professionally distant, and unmistakably corrective. Your recent logs indicate a deviation from observational neutrality. Clarification is requested. Yaw sat still as the message hovered on his console. Outside, the stars maintained their silent order, indifferent to the language of authority being drafted in their name. Observational neutrality. The phrase implied that seeing clearly required detachment, that truth revealed itself only when the observer refused to be involved. Yaw once believed that too. It was the foundation of his training. But the signal had changed that. The signal did not reward distance. It did not respond to neutrality. It existed regardless of posture. Yaw reviewed his recordings, every timestamp, every waveform, every harmonic alignment. The data was sound, more than sound. It was consistent across independent systems, resistant to noise, immune to degradation. Truth, he realized, did not need neutrality. It needed honesty. He opened a live channel to command for the first time since the directives began escalating. "This signal is not behaving like interference," Yaw said evenly. "It demonstrates intentional structure." There was a pause before the response arrived. "Intent is not a measurable property." Yaw nodded to himself. "No, but order is." Silence followed, not the quiet endurance of the signal, but a calculated absence, the kind used to reassert dominance. Yaw felt the weight of it press in. Authority often mistook silence for compliance. He thought of faith again, not as doctrine, but as fidelity. To witness something and deny its implications was not humility, it was fear disguised as professionalism. If creation is ordered, then recognizing that order is not belief, it's observation. Another pause. "Your role is to report, not interpret." Yaw's voice softened, but did not waver. "My role is to witness. Interpretation begins only after denial fails." The channel closed without ceremony. Yaw exhaled slowly. This was the cost he had sensed earlier. Faith did not rebel for the sake of rebellion. It endured tension. It remained present when obedience demanded silence. The signal pulsed again, steady, patient, unaltered by the exchange. It neither affirmed nor corrected him, and that, more than anything, confirmed his growing conviction. Truth did not need his defense, but it did require his faithfulness. Yaw saved the transmission logs one final time, encrypting them beyond Command's standard access protocols, not as an act of defiance, but of preservation. Some things were entrusted, not owned. As the stars drifted silently beyond the station window, Yaw Ati understood that obedience without truth was empty, and faith, once tested by authority, could no longer return to being private.
Episode 6. The Weight of Witness. Witness was heavier than Yaw Ati had expected, not because it demanded action, but because it removed excuses. Once something was seen clearly, the luxury of uncertainty disappeared. Silence became a choice, not a default. The system stations began their routine diagnostics, cycling through checks that now felt rehearsed. Each confirmation of normal function contrasted sharply with the anomaly that refused to be normalized. The signal persisted. Yaw noticed that it no longer startled him. Its presence had settled into something closer to companionship, not personal, not emotional, but constant, reliable, as though the universe itself had decided to remain attentive. Another directive arrived, this one stripped of pretense. Prepare to transfer anomaly oversight to central authority. Yaw read the message without surprise. Central authority did not investigate mysteries, it contained them. He ran a comparative analysis one final time, overlaying the signal structure against known cosmic constants. The alignment was precise beyond probability. This was not coincidence stacking itself into meaning. It was coherence revealing itself through repetition. In theology, repetition was often misunderstood as redundancy. In truth, it was confirmation. What remained consistent under scrutiny proved itself trustworthy. Yaw closed his eyes briefly. Faith was not the absence of doubt. It was the refusal to let doubt erase evidence. He recorded another private log, his voice quieter now, not because of fear, but gravity. If witness is given, then responsibility follows. not because truth demands obedience, but because it deserves integrity. He paused. To see and remain silent is to participate in falsehood. The signal continued. No approval, no correction, only presence. Yaw understood then that the signal did not require belief, it required honesty, the kind that endured even when authority withdrew its protection. The transfer countdown began on his console, an automated process irreversible once initiated. In minutes, oversight would be stripped from his hands, routed through layers of distance and procedure. Yaw did not stop it. Instead, he duplicated the core data set and transmitted it along an older channel, one designed not for command efficiency, but for archival survival. Knowledge preserved, not controlled. As the final seconds ticked away, Yaw felt the weight settle fully. Faith had grown quiet but firm, no longer inherited, no longer theoretical. It had become fidelity to truth, to order, to the responsibility of having seen. When the transfer completed, the signal remained, still steady, still patient, still waiting. And Yaw Ati remained with it, not as its interpreter, but as its witness.
Episode 7. When Silence Becomes a Choice. Silence had once felt safe to Yaw Ati. In the early days of his assignment, it had been a professional posture, an absence of interference, a way to let data speak for itself. But silence had changed meaning. It was no longer passive. It was deliberate. The station felt smaller now, not physically, but ethically. Every corridor, every console, every muted indicator light seemed to participate in the same question: what will you do with what you know? Yaw reviewed the transmission logs one last time. Nothing new, no escalation, no warning. The signal remained exactly as it had been from the beginning, structured, patient, unconcerned with outcomes. That was what made the choice unavoidable. If the signal had demanded response, he could have justified resistance. If it had threatened consequence, he could have framed compliance as survival. But it did neither. It respected silence, and in doing so, it exposed it. Yaw remembered another theological idea that had unsettled him even as a child, that judgment was not always an act imposed from outside. Sometimes it was simply the unveiling of what had already been chosen. Silence, once chosen, became testimony. Another message arrived from central authority, its tone colder than before. Non-compliance will be noted. Not punished, not corrected, not addressed. Noted. Yaw smiled faintly. Institutions feared clarity more than dissent. Silence, documented, could later be reinterpreted. Spoken truth could not. He opened a public relay channel, one rarely used, accessible only to stations within a limited radius. Not a broadcast, not an announcement, a witness. This is Observer Ati. An anomaly has been recorded. Structure confirmed. Origin unknown. Presence sustained. He paused, letting the words exist without justification. This transmission does not assert intent. It confirms order. He closed the channel. The act was small, measured, almost insignificant, but silence had been broken. The signal continued, unchanged. Yaw felt no triumph, no reassurance. Faith did not reward obedience with comfort.
It only clarified responsibility. If creation bore meaning, then ignoring it was not neutrality. It was refusal. And refusal, once chosen, shaped the soul. Yaw returned to the observation window. The stars remained indifferent to his decision, yet somehow the universe felt more truthful for it. Silence was an option. Now, it was no longer available.
Episode 8. The Cost of Being Heard. The response did not come immediately. Yaw Ati had expected that. Authority rarely reacted in real time. It preferred delay, space enough to reframe events, to decide what something meant before acknowledging that it had happened at all. The signal, however, did not delay. It remained. Yaw noticed something new in its persistence, not a change in structure or intensity, but in his perception of it. The signal no longer felt like an anomaly pressing against the limits of understanding. It felt integrated, woven into the fabric of the station's existence, as though it had always been there, and he was only now prepared to notice it. Being heard, he realized, did not always mean being answered. It meant being seen. A system alert chimed softly. Access privileges had been altered, not revoked, narrowed, subtle enough to be framed as routine optimization, clear enough to be understood. Yaw accepted the change without resistance. Cost was inevitable. Faith did not eliminate consequence, it clarified it. He ran one final verification scan. The signal's coherence remained perfect, untouched by attention or neglect. It did not react to authority's adjustments. It did not respond to his decision to speak. Truth did not perform. That, more than anything, convinced him. In theology, there was an old idea that creation itself testified, that the order of the universe bore witness independent of interpretation. Yaw always thought that sounded poetic. Now it felt technical. Order did not argue. It endured. He recorded his last log for the cycle. "I was heard," he said quietly, "not because I spoke loudly, but because I spoke truly." He paused. If authority chooses silence in response, that too will testify. The station lights dimmed again as the orbit adjusted. Beyond the window, the stars shifted with imperceptible precision, obeying laws older than command structures, older than language. The signal continued. No triumph, no revelation, no closure, only presence. Yaw Ati stood at the threshold he had crossed long ago, not between belief and doubt, but between obedience and fidelity. He knew now that faith did not require certainty. It required faithfulness, and faithfulness, once chosen, reshaped everything that followed. The universe did not answer him. It did something far more demanding. It remained true.